the July webinar from the National Building Control Office. And today we have Pat Nestor, and Pat is the Chartered Surveyor and he's head of the Building Control with Dublin City Council, which is the largest building control authority in Ireland. So Pat's a very busy man and a good team out there watching out for compliance with the building regulations. And Pat's going to speak to us on the importance of compliance and the role of building control. We also have Éanna Keneally, and Éanna Keneally is from the National Building Control Office, and his job is to organise these webinars. And we have Shirley Lamb, who manages everything else with the National Building Control Office. So you're very welcome, and we'll speak to you for the next hour on building control and the importance of building control in everyday life for the social, economic and social development of the country. Just a little bit about myself and the National Building Control Office. I'm Mairéad Phelan, and I'm head of the National Building Control and now a National Market Surveillance Office. We have a 5-pillar programme, and our office is funded by the 31 building control authorities, solely funded by those. We have a compliance support pillar. In the compliance support, we answer about 6,000 questions from owners, builders, designers, science certifiers, and the general public every year. We have an education and training programme, and that includes this webinar today. And we also run a certificate in building control management with Carlow IT, which will now be the Technological University of the South East. And in 2020, 120 people graduated from this certificate course, and 2021 we expect to graduate about 77. So it's open for applicants for the 2021-22 academic year. It's a very good course, and it goes through everything you need to know for building control, but it doesn't make you a building control officer or an expert, but everybody that works in building control should at least do that. We have an inspections pillar where we promote inspections in the building control authorities. We support building control officers to strengthen their inspection regime. We promote visibility on the ground to promote compliance with the regulations. Our BCMS pillar is the online system where all our applications, certificates and notices are available to be submitted online. And for those of you that are working with the system, we have updated the system just in the last couple of days to provide for SI 229 of 2021, which is a change in the form of application for the fire safety certificates. So thank you for your cooperation in assisting us in doing this, and that's now available online. And lastly, but not least, we were made a competent authority for the purpose of market surveillance at the beginning of this year. And we now are the National Market Surveillance Authority. And if you look at the bottom of the slide there, you see our website and the Dublin City Council website and our Twitter page. Keep an eye on the Twitter page and our LinkedIn page for our webinars and up-to-dates of what we're actually doing. We promote compliance with the building regulations. Building regulations are for health, safety and welfare of people in or about buildings. Very, very, very important. We live in our houses for 50, 60 years. We need to have safe, accessible, sustainable buildings that we can live for our lifetime, that doesn't cost us excessive cost in remediation, repairs or fixing pyrite or mica or anything like that. So it's very, very important that we build right once and then have a comfortable lifetime in our buildings. So the building regulations, we have the Building Control Acts, the Parent Act with building regulations, that's the design requirements of buildings, the building control regulations, which is the administrative part of buildings. And then we are also responsible for the implementation of the energy performance, the European energy performance of building regulations. So it's quite a big spectrum, and the legislative framework surrounding building control is quite large. Our Pillar 5, we also are the National Market Surveillance Authority. And the act that we work under is SI 225 of 2013, which will be changed now quite soon because the European Union brought in an updated piece for the Regulation 305 of 2011. That's the EU Construction Products Regulations. And now we'll be updating SI 225 to incorporate an update of that, which is European Union Regulation 1020 of 2019. So you'll see a little change there in SI 225 quite soon, I would believe. We've 31 market surveillance authorities. Every local authority is a building control authority, and every local authority is a market surveillance authority. We have 3 competent authorities in the legislation. One is Dublin City Council, and Dublin City Council is the main national competent authority for the purpose of dealing with the EU and with the construction products. And then you have the Geological Services of Ireland is another competent authority for a product area 24, that's aggregates. And you have the National Roads Authority, which is a competent authority for a product area 12, 23 and 24, and those are all products relating to the construction of roads. We have quite a big army of inspectors on the ground who are out there every day promoting compliance with the building control regulations and the market surveillance regulations. And you can contact building standards, that's housing.gov.ie, or support@nbco.gov.ie, or you can contact your individual building control authorities if you have a query. For today now, I'm just saying, just use the question and answer function throughout the webinar, and it's under the video description, and you can comment on YouTube. So I'm going to now have the pleasure of handing you over to Pat Nestor. Pat is, as I said, is a chartered surveyor, the head of building control in Dublin City Council, and he's instrumental in promoting health, safety and welfare of people in or about buildings, conservation of fuel and energy, and access for all of the buildings within Dublin City Council area. So thank you, Pat, and I'm going to hand over to you. I'll stop my share now, and you can share. I put myself on mute.
Thank you, Mairéad. Thank you for that introduction and the opportunity to speak to you today. And thanks to everyone for tuning in. I will do my screen share now. Yeah. So I've been asked to speak on the importance of compliance and the role of the Building Control Authority. So each local authority is a building control authority in its own right, and we operate a common system across the country. So what I say here is very much the case in Dublin City and largely the case around the country. So I'll just, if you remember back to the 1st of March 2014, I don't know if anyone is counting, but it was a Saturday. It was 7 years and 4 months, 22 days ago. And that was the day that the amendments to building control regulations were introduced, SI 9 of 2014. It was the most significant change to the regulation of building standards in Ireland since building control came into force in 1992. Within that period of time, we have people who have completed their Leaving Cert, have gone through 3rd level education and are building successful careers in the construction industry. And all they know in their career is BCAR and compliance. So I'll ask a question, perhaps to set the scene a little on regulation. And it is, do you believe it is necessary to regulate the development of the built environment? Do we need regulations? Slightly rhetorical, not looking for an answer, but just something to consider through the next few slides. And another question, so why do we need regulations, and why do we need regulators such as building control? The OECD have provided an answer for this, and regulation is a key tool for achieving the social, economic and environmental policy objectives of governments that cannot be effectively addressed through voluntary arrangements and other means. So I'll just take some of the words out of that. Regulations are there to achieve objectives that cannot be addressed through voluntary arrangements. So the system of building control regulation and the extent of regulation prior to 2014 was relied more on voluntary arrangements than currently the case, and that wasn't working. The research and work of the OECD has very much informed how we implement building control across the country. So that day in March in 2014 when SI 9 was introduced. The explanatory note attaching to the statutory instrument further explained why the regulations were coming in to strengthen the current arrangements in place for the control of building activity, requiring greater accountability in relation to compliance by using statutory certification of design and construction, lodgement of compliance documentation, mandatory inspections during construction, and validation and registration of these certificates. So that is really pretty major change in terms of the accountability. And accountability is the thread that runs through the building control system. Now, as Mairéad described earlier, there's the Building Control Act. We have building regulations, which are technical requirements in construction. And the building control system, building control regulations, are the procedures that, if followed, will allow you to demonstrate that you have complied with the requirements of the technical building regulations. So, first question you would ask yourself, do the technical building regulations apply to my project? And there are a list of buildings which are exempted from the requirements of the building regulations set out in the third schedule of Building Regulations SI 497 of 1997. This has been amended on several occasions. So some on that original list have been struck off. But single-story agricultural buildings under 300 square meters, for example, are exempt. A carport is exempt. Bicycle shed is exempt. An aviary. So you should check if your building is exempt. Take care of the conditions and limitations and any subsequent amendments to the legislation on that list. And if you're in any doubt, contact your local building control officer. Because the importance of knowing if the building regulations apply means if they do not apply, then none of the procedures of the building control regulations, which are there to demonstrate compliance with building regulations, they won't apply either. And in coming to your conclusions on this and what level of building control applies to your project, you need to know the terms and definitions of building control that make up the regulations. You need to know what a material alteration is. You need to know what a material change of use is in the context of the building control legislation. And a material change of use in building control is different from a material change of use in planning legislation. You need to know what are minor works, what is a repair or renewal, what are fixtures or fittings, know the office shop, know the difference between a shop and a shopping center, know what a place of assembly involves, know what constitutes a flat. And if you have a flat in a building that you're working on, you may not be working on the flat. The presence of the flat will bring a higher level of requirements. So you need to know if you have a flat in your building, if people are living overhead a shop or office that you're working on. So building control regulations are actually the 1997 to 2021, so an error on that. They've been revised most recently. And the Law Reform Commission have already updated a consolidated version of the building control regulations, incorporating the latest revisions, which came into force on the 1st of July 2021. So they're very much on the ball. So these building control regulations are the procedures to demonstrate compliance. They're made up of different parts. Part 2 describes commencement notices and certificates of compliance before construction. Part 3 goes through the requirements on fire safety certificates. Part 3A, 7-day notice is described, certificates of compliance, revised fire safety certificate, regularization certificate, statutory declaration, and 7-day notice statutory declaration. Part 3B, disability access certificates and revised disability access certificates. And then Part 3C, very importantly, is a certificate of compliance on completion. And that is the end goal for a project. Where you need a certificate of compliance on completion, it should always be borne in mind that everything you do might impact on ultimately achieving that during a project. So Being familiar with the application of building control regulations, and you need to apply them in each individual case to your project. Each individual project needs to be considered in its own right in terms of how building control will apply to it. So there are 4 different ways of giving notice to the Building Control Authority of your intention to commence work. The commencement notice without accompanying compliance documentation, which is the simplest form of commencement notice. They're all submitted on the BCMS, but this is a single form and there is no accompanying documentation required. There is, and it is for smaller scale works. A commencement notice accompanied by the opt-out declaration, which is intended for like larger domestic extensions, construction of a one-off house on a single residential development. It is necessary to accompany that notice with drawings and an inspection plan prepared by a competent person, not necessarily a professionally registered person. The next 2 notices are the commencement notice with accompanying compliance documentation. That involves all of the accompanying certificates, the appointment of an assigned certifier, appointment of a builder, the undertaking signed by the builder, and so forth. And the 7-day notice is very similar. It allows you to start after 7 days have elapsed. It must be accompanied by a valid fire safety certificate application and also a statutory declaration. And since the 1st of July, all of those can be submitted online, and the original statutory declaration should be held in the office and made available if requested by the Building Control Authority. But it's not necessary to submit it in order to achieve validation. So first 2, there's no completion documents required. And the second 2 notices, there are completion documents required. You will need a certificate of compliance on completion in order to occupy the building. But regardless of the complexity of the work, everyone involved in the design and construction of work, who commissions work, who designs work, who constructs work, they're responsible. They have responsibility to comply with the requirements of the technical building regulations, and that is across all construction work. And where you need a certificate of compliance on completion, there's a very significant practical incentive built into the regulations. Where you require the certificate, the particulars of that certificate must be recorded on the register before the building may be opened, occupied, or used. And that is set down in the regulations. It's a prohibition on using the building or occupying the building until you have that certificate recorded on the building control register. If a commencement notice was not submitted in the first instance for the work, it will not be possible to achieve a certificate of compliance on completion on the register. There's just nowhere for it to go. It must be attached to a commencement notice that was properly submitted at the beginning, before the work started. It is an offence, and you may well be prosecuted if you occupy a building without the required certificate of compliance on completion being on the register. Now, what happens if you have failed to notify the Building Control Authority by way of a commencement notice or 7-day notice of construction work starting? Like, is there any undo button for these? Is there any procedure to help? I'm afraid there is not any mechanism in the regulations which allows you to regularize a failure to notify building control of a project commencing. It's an offence to commence work without submitting the necessary commencement notice. If you're in this situation, you should communicate with the Building Control Authority and seek their advice. Their options are very limited, and we are aware of several situations where work which was completed has been completely deconstructed and commenced again in a compliant fashion. And normally, the technical defects have been discovered in these situations as well. So it's very important to notify submit the correct form of commencement notice at the correct time. So a certificate of compliance on completion is required to occupy or use the building, but there are situations where the certificate of compliance on completion is submitted and is rejected by building control. So Dublin City Council, we have reviewed over 1,300 invalid certificates of compliance and completion that have been made invalid right across the country, across every local authority. And just to give you a sample of them, in 34% of those cases, the work was not complete. Now, most of the time, it seems the people involved in the project notified, submitted a date where they expected the work to be completed, a pre-notification of the completion date, and they did not achieve that pre-notification date, and so informed building control that they were not going to meet the date, and so the submission was made invalid. On other occasions, it is discovered by inspection that the work is not complete, the construction work is still ongoing, and yet the certificate of compliance on completion has been signed, and that's pretty serious, considering that it is a statutory document. It could be considered misleading the Building Control Authority. Other cases, 15% documentation was not in order, wrong names, no signatures, in the wrong document selected for the upload, so an undertaking document uploaded instead of the actual certificate of compliance and completion, or so forth. 14% of cases, there were outstanding technical queries from building control to the construction team. So they had not responded to what's called a Section 11 request from building control. And therefore, the certificate of compliance and completion must be made invalid. Building control have no choice. The regulations require the CCC to be invalid if there are outstanding queries. 11% of cases, the work was found on inspection to be non-compliant with technical requirements of the building regulations, such as Part M for access, Part B fire safety, and even structural failures. 6% of cases, necessary fire safety certificate or DAC was not in place. And often people might forget that they require the DAC in particular, and then if the DAC is required, it's not in place. Again, the regulations require the Building Control Authority to make invalid the Certificate of Compliance on Completion submission. So 18%, there were other reasons, random other reasons, such as a change of builder or assigned certifier that had not been notified, change of owner, and quite a few cases, the Certificate of Compliance on Completion had already been submitted and made valid, which is curious. But in any event, if your Certificate of Compliance on Completion is rejected by building control at the completion stage, this causes significant delay and creates a great risk for the project at completion stage, when everyone is expecting to successfully exit the project, should be proud of their work. This fairly significant risk is presented at the end, and the reason why can be traced. So it's important to follow the procedures of building control to avoid this situation. And you could ask yourself more questions. Does the client, person commissioning the work, the owner of the works, do they expect a high quality project and a compliant project? Will they look for evidence that the project is delivered to the required specification, and is it compliant with statutory requirements? Can the client rely on everybody involved to voluntarily deliver the standard of quality required on the project? So where the regulations are required, where voluntary arrangements do not work, it's unlikely that everybody involved in the project will voluntarily achieve the high standard required. But of course, the main reason for following the regulations is that it is the law of the land. It's on the statute books. It's a mandatory statutory obligation. And failure to comply with the requirements of building control, with the procedures of the building control regulations, is an offence. You may be prosecuted by the Building Control Authority, or in serious cases, files may be referred to the Director of Public Prosecutions, who may take a prosecution against people who break the regulations. Now, speaking of an offence, under Section 11.5c of the Building Control Acts, there is a particular offence of dishonesty. Any person who willfully or recklessly gives, either to an authorised person or to a building control authority, information which is false or misleading in a material respect, shall be guilty of an offence. So it's important to be straight with building control officers. Where a request for information is made by a building control officer, there is a statutory obligation, again, to submit the information that's being sought. Failure to do so is an offence, a separate offence. So if you're in the situation, well, hopefully you won't be, but there are processes within the regulations, and Section 17 of the Building Control Act sets out the penalties if you are convicted. And summary prosecutions in the district court, if you are convicted there, the maximum fine is currently €5,000, up to 6 months imprisonment, or both the fine and the imprisonment. So obviously a very serious situation. These are criminal convictions. If the matter is referred to the Director of Public Prosecution, the maximum fine that can be applied is up to €50,000 and up to 2 years imprisonment, or both the fine and the imprisonment. And a person convicted of an offence may be disqualified from signing and submitting certificates of compliance with building regulations for a period of up to 2 years if convicted by the district court, and up to 10 years if convicted on indictment. So that will apply to registered professionals, to architects, to building surveyors, and to chartered engineers. They could be disqualified from signing the certificates in building control. Now, these are last resort situations where prosecutions are taken. Oh, and all the costs, if you are convicted, all costs of building control are recoverable. So it's a last resort to take prosecutions and to end up in that situation. Like the great majority of work undertaken is persuasion and advice on site. If there is a problem discovered on site by building control, the advice would be given, and normally, a great majority of cases, these are technical problems, technical defects. There's a technical solution. There's really not a lot of argument. If it's done wrong, it's often pretty obvious that it needs to be corrected and put right. So advice and persuasion generally is enough. In situations where the advice is not taken, warning letters may be sent, and warning letters are pretty severe in their wording. They don't pull any punches in terms of what the consequences will be if the defective situation is not put right. If that advice is not taken, we move to an enforcement notice issued by the Building Control Authority. That if you do receive an enforcement notice, it may be appealed to the district court, where the Building Control Authority will defend that appeal. In very serious situations, the Building Control Authority may apply for an order to the High Court, or in the smaller projects on to the Circuit Court. So that's where there is particular risk to life or safety. Prosecution end of things, as described earlier, summary prosecution or prosecution on indictment. But just in case you think it's all just one way, and part of the title of the talk is the role of building control. So building control authorities also have statutory duties and statutory obligations placed on them by the Building Control Act. They are required to manage the submissions of commencement notices and 7-day notices, to deal with them in a timely way. Building control must determine applications for fire safety certificates, disability access certificates, and so on, and issue such certificates with or without conditions, or refuse these certificates. So these are a very important part of the process. We also consider the submissions of certificates of compliance on completion before they are placed on the register. And as I went through the reasons why, sometimes they are rejected. We cooperate with the appeals process. Applications for fire safety certificates, disability access certificates, and so on. Those decisions can be appealed to An Bord Pleanála, or any conditions attaching to those may be appealed to An Bord Pleanála, and building control authorities will cooperate with An Bord Pleanála and often will make submissions during the course of an appeal within the statutory timelines. We also maintain the register in accordance with Part 4 of the Building Control Regulations 1997 to 2021. So building control are, we share your goal of delivering high quality, safe and sustainable built environment. The Building Control Authority is subject to rules such as validating commencement notices within 7 days, issuing fire safety certificates and disability access certificates within 2 months. And so we are required to report on these things, and performance is monitored. And reports on all broad local authority activity is published each year by the National Oversight and Audit Commission for Local Government, and they publish their reports on their website. The last report on the key performances of local authorities was for the year 2019, and the performance during 2020, the report will be due in the coming weeks or months. The key performance indicator for building control that is measured by the National Oversight Commission is the number of new buildings inspected as a percentage of the number of new buildings notified to the Building Control Authority. The minimum recommended rate of inspection of these buildings is between 12 to 15%. However, Dublin City is a dense urban area, the area of Dublin City Council, so we feel a much higher rate of inspection is required here, and we aim to inspect on average at least 70% of all new buildings which are notified to us. And in 2020 we achieved that, just short of it in 2019, but in 2020 we achieved 70%. We prioritize new multi-unit housing and apartment developments as a high priority for inspection, and we try to achieve a 100% inspection rate of all new multi-unit housing. Inspections, we try and inspect the site as early as possible after commencement of the work, and building control officers will return on a recurring routine basis to that job until it is complete. So the building control authorities have put in place through the National Building Control Office a great cooperative network, and we have a common framework to operate under right across the country. We're trying to standardize our work practices, our systems and procedures, our decision making in relation to building control to bring consistency to the whole operation nationally, so that if you are carrying out a construction project in a western county, your interaction with building control will be similar to if you were doing it in a southern county or in a city. And we have a common risk-based approach to sites selected for inspection. Obviously, priorities will change between a dense urban area such as Dublin and a more rural county. So, as I said, building control will support and encourage people in their efforts to deliver compliant solutions on their projects. We provide advice to the public, to builders, to professionals. As Mairéad said, like thousands of inquiries each year come into the NBCO. It's a similar situation here in Dublin City Council, where we deal directly with people working on their projects in the city. We give opinions where there may be a compliance disagreement on a project. So our view may be sought in terms of there may be disagreement between engineers, architects and surveyors or specialist subcontractors as to what is compliant, and building control can assist by giving an opinion. and that is set down in the framework for inspecting and certifying buildings and works. We engage with professional organizations in terms of supporting them, their CPD programs, and talks such as this one. And importantly, we provide a visible presence on construction sites through our inspections. And that expertise is available to builders when we arrive on site in terms of seeking opinion. And very often, so many times, on-site builders are proud to demonstrate the good work that they're doing, the processes they have in place, how they're delivering quality and compliance. And we support the industry broadly in delivering high quality, sustainable built environment. So just some final thoughts. Certainly in my view, the building control system is very necessary. It is reviewed regularly, as we've seen with the latest update to the regulations on the 1st of July. And we do have the tools necessary to deliver compliance. I feel they are in place. The introduction of building control amendment regulations in March 2014, it has made a very real difference to the quality of our newly constructed buildings. It came at a very good time, very opportune time, as changes were also occurring to the technical building regulations, particularly Part L. So the building a house in 2008 was very, very different to building a house in 2015. So the high level of inspection design that was required and the certification of that work came just in time. So we would urge you to apply your professional experience, your technical knowledge, your skills, and like most of all, your common sense in achieving compliance on the construction site. And building control will support you where you are trying to achieve compliance. Even in awkward situations or unique situations, don't be afraid to come to building control with your proposals that may not be covered in the existing guidance. More support is also available. As mentioned, the code of practice for inspecting and certifying buildings and works is very important. That sets out in plain language how you can comply with the requirements of building control and what you need to do in different situations. The roles and responsibilities of the builder, the owner, the designer, the assigned certifier are set out very clearly, and building control. We also have the publication Bringing Back Homes, which intended for reusing existing buildings, but it also sets out very clearly and plainly the requirements of the building control system and what applies in certain situations which may not apply in others. And of course, we have the National Building Control Office, localgov.ie, and a whole suite of frequently asked questions there, which give a very high level of guidance. And I think that is it. So if you wish to contact building control, I said a few times to contact building control if you have doubts on your construction project. Dublin City Council, our email is buildingcontrol@dublincity.ie. Telephone us directly. And all the local authorities have a similar email address. So just email building control at whatever your local authority's domain is. Also, you can submit questions to your building control authority through the BCMS website at localgov.ie/contact. Thank you very much indeed. I will stop sharing and return to Mairéad. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pat, for a very comprehensive overview of the role of building control and the importance of compliance. The importance of compliance cannot be underestimated. The compliance is for health, safety, welfare of people living inside buildings. You must be able to breathe in your building. So you must comply with Part F. You must be able to have adequate daylight. You must have adequate and heating that is not either too hot or too cold. So all of these things are very important. The building must stay up. And talking about the rigors of complying with building regulations, it's for the purpose of giving you a comfortable home, building, or workplace for a period of at least 50 to 60 years. You wouldn't buy a kettle without having it certified by a competent person or plug it in. Why would you have a building built without having a competent builder, designer, and making sure it's compliant? So it's very, very important for health and safety and welfare. Pat, thank you for that. We have a good few questions, but some of them are sort of very general questions. So what I might do here, Éanna, and Éanna's been answering them here, so I might just go down to the very bottom of them. But all of everybody's questions will be answered, and we'll put them underneath our YouTube on the YouTube channel. Pat, we're just heading towards 1 o'clock, and I think I'll take this opportunity to thank you for your time and a very comprehensive overview of the role of building control and compliance. What I would say to everybody, and Pat mentioned on his last slide there, the framework for building control authorities, it's on the front of our website. It's a small document, it's easy read. We're actually updating it at the moment. The Bringing Back Homes Manual is an excellent document, and it's also a small and easy read document. And the Code of Practice for Inspecting and Certifying Buildings and Works, it's a small document. There's only a few pages. Anybody that is going to build or starting to build or involved in the building control process should actually take a little bit of time and read those. So at this note, I'm going to say thank you to Shirley for organising the webinar, Éanna and Pat, and to everybody that has attended. Have a good afternoon, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Mairéad.
Thank you, everybody.